Good morning, this is Steve again from the Fairfield Seventh-day Adventist Church. And let's just start right into this. First of all, just bringing us up to speed, okay? Because with us doing one session every month, it's kind of hard to remember where we were. All three of these sessions are rooted in my discovery last year. This is old news for the professional world, but my discovery that research back in the 1990s showed that traumatic events in our childhood and chronic stress actually changes our brains. The parts of our brains that affect our judgment and our emotional stability are actually smaller if we've been living with toxic stress. And that change in our brains translates to a risk for illness throughout our entire lives. The experiences you had as a child are a stronger predictor of whether you have a heart attack or cancer or thyroid dysfunction or depression, anxiety, than anything else we know of. Okay? So, what these three series are focused on is how do we develop resilience? The ability to withstand these traumas, not get blown away. Now, for us as Christians, okay, that includes dealing with temptation, because the same things that affect judgment and emotional stability and produce physical and mental illness weaken us spiritually. So, Get Off the Merry-Go-Round focuses on what we can draw as strength from Christ. The sessions on the Holy Spirit focuses on the role of God's power in our lives. And what we're talking about today, sources of strength, well, let's go back to the first session. Last month, Brian, can you get the lights there? We're getting glare off the screen there. Just turn off the main lights. There we go.
Oh.
That's good. We talked about putting on the whole armor of God last month. And Ephesians 6:10 was our primary text, which talks about calls us to be strong in the Lord. And we looked at scrawny Steve, who wanted to be like Charles Atlas. And we talked about the Roman soldiers who bartered away their advantages in battle by negotiating so they didn't have to wear their armor while they were practicing, and then found it bulky and cumbersome when they had to go into battle. And we discovered that all it takes is 36 hours without sleep and with dehydration and junk food, and Steve turns into the monster. Okay? Now, as Christians, we emphasize that the just shall live by faith, and we emphasize the role of faith in our lives. But what we often neglect is the corollary that faith is the life that we live. Faith produces a life that strengthens us, and if we're not living that faith, we don't gain that strength. That's the kernel of what we're talking about here. Okay? So we were brainstorming about what makes us strong and what makes us weak, and this is the list we came up with as a church last month. Okay? Don't worry, the church here doesn't remember any of this, okay? And we're not going to go through all of this in detail, because I went and digested this all down into 8 simple categories, which we're going to call the circle of strength: body care, caring for the body; mind care, spirit care; managing stress; supportive family; positive friendships; education; and finances. Mm-hmm. And there's our project for the rest of the year. You chose the topics, now we go and explore them. So today we're going to start out with the first category, body care, how we care for our body, how this strengthens us and produces resilience in the face of trauma, toxic stress, adverse childhood experiences. For those of us who are dealing with depression, anxiety, this is a very real thing, and resilience is very real. So, how are we going to do this? Because this is a topic, taking health is a topic that angels fear to tread on, okay? Just within my circle of Facebook friends, okay? So stepping outside of the church, and I know we have polarities here, but this is a really polarized subject. In my circle of friends, I have friends who are adamant about traditional medicine and friends who are adamant about alternative medicine. Friends who espouse a Western philosophy of health and friends who espouse an Eastern philosophy of health. Some that promote essential oils and some that promote faith healing. You know, and it just, how do we have a conversation about health? Vegan versus paleo? Yeah, I see some confusion on the vegan's mind. What's paleo? Okay, that's just the polarization we deal with. How do we have a conversation about health that's productive for all of us when we are in this polarized society? Well, today I'm bringing in a consultant. Okay?
He's going to leave, that's why.
I am bringing in a consultant. Some of you may know him. This is my son, Eric. And welcome, Eric. It's really good to have you with us today. Says Dad, who has young. Okay, but Eric is a practicing Stoic, and Steve is a practicing Seventh-day Adventist. You would think we would be really polarized, and the fact is that we have to work to find common ground. So to start out with, Eric, why don't you introduce us to what Stoicism is, because this is not something that most of my friends, in fact, I had one of my friends say, "What is a Stoic anyhow?"
Well, yeah, so Stoics or Stoicism is something most people know from history books. It is an ancient Greek and Roman way of life that has gotten some popularity with certain groups today who have kind of revived it and dusted off. And so the way I like to explain Stoicism is it was founded by a Phoenician merchant about 300 some odd years before Christ, who got shipwrecked on the shores of Greece. While in his ship, he was carrying a very expensive load of rich clothing and cloths. And he lost everything that he owned in this shipwreck, far from home, across the sea. And so he is living now, suddenly destitute, in the city of Athens, and he encounters a bookstore that has books on philosophy.
Now this sounds like a really traumatic event, okay? If I lost every resource I had, and was stranded far away, I would be pretty desperate. What's he doing in a bookstore interested in philosophy?
I think he's just that kind of guy. So his name was Zeno, and he's in this bookstore reading a scroll about Socrates. So Socrates had been dead for a few generations at this point. But he asks the bookseller, he's like, I'm in a hard time of life. I'm looking for some guidance here. Where can I find a man who lives like Socrates? And the bookstore owner points at a guy walking past in the street and says, go follow him, that cynic over there. So Zeno joins the school of the Cynics, who were one of a number of ancient Greek philosophical groups. And all of these different Greek philosophies at the time. At the time, philosophy wasn't this abstract, dry, academic thing we associate it with today. At the time, all the Greek philosophies, all of them, promised by some way or another to give you peace and happiness if you follow their way of life, despite all the throws and ups and downs that life inevitably throws at you. So Zeno starts following the Cynics, who weren't the dry political cynics we talk about today, but they had some of that aspect. But the Cynics' main point of view and belief was, well, to handle all the adversity life throws at you, what you got to do is develop a tough, thick skin. You got to have a stiff upper lip. And their way of dealing with misfortune was to detach yourself from the world as much as possible.
So they were British?
They were the stereotypical British stiff upper lip. Right.
Okay.
Right. So the analogy for the Cynics is they would try and develop calluses, figuratively and literally. They were known for going out in the dead of winter and hugging a cold stone statue just to train themselves not to care about temperature and so on and so forth. So Zeno thought, well, this has some value for me in my situation now, living as a destitute immigrant suddenly here in Athens. But he wasn't quite convinced. And so I don't know if he visited the Epicureans, who were another alternative school at the time. But if he did, we know he would have been welcomed outside the city by the Epicureans into what they called their garden. And if he showed up, they would say, "Friend, welcome." They would invite him in, hand him a bowl of cold, unseasoned, unsalted porridge, and say, "Welcome, friend, to our garden." And in the Epicurean way of life, they would try and teach him to cultivate pleasure as much as possible, but mostly internally. So learn to enjoy an unseasoned bowl of porridge. Develop friendships with us here in our garden, far away from the city where you have all those jobs and politics and responsibilities, and build your friendships so that you have a support network and a source of pleasure as you get older. And so Zeno said, well, okay, the Epicureans, they've got some things right, but this is a little radical. And what he ended up developing was a hybrid, where he's like, okay, we're going to take the Stoic emphasis on developing resilience and focusing on what is internal to us instead of being at the whim of our external situation. But we're also going to take the Epicurean awareness that we're human beings, right? And we have things that are natural for us, things that give us pleasure, things that give us pain that we maybe want to avoid. And he developed a hybrid of these two things that became very popular as the ancient philosophy of the elite Roman class. So probably the most famous Stoic is Emperor Marcus Aurelius. This is me with his statue at the Capitoline Museum in Rome on my honeymoon, trying to imitate his. I think he's forgiving Germans he's captured here with this hand signal. But and in the Stoic life, there are really, to boil it down, kind of three big ideas that I now try to implement in my own life in conjunction with my little Stoic fellowship group that meets on coffee shops sometimes where I live in Washington, D.C. And one is distinguish between what you can control and what you can't control. So in Stoicism, we really try to emphasize that we have some control over our opinions, motivations, reactions to things around us, and our ambitions to develop ourselves. But we don't control if our ship gets wrecked on the shores of Greece. We don't control if our house burns down or if our loved ones treat us in unloving ways and so forth. And that distinction is kind of fundamental. So it's a philosophy that aims at helping us develop inner peace in difficult situations. But another major component of it is what we do with that, what we do with our own agency. And that's where moral self-development and cultivation comes in. So we want to focus on what we can control, and what we can control is, how I converse with my father. I can control what I do when I get up in the morning. I can control, in principle, whether I behave in a lazy way or if I'm a go-getter, right? Now, we all know it's a little more complicated than that. Our biology kind of plays into our motivation and our ups and downs. But that's the basic idea, is that we want to try and pursue excellence within the constraints of the cards fortune has dealt us.
So, if I can play back what I'm hearing, Stoicism was a middle path between the stiff upper lip of cynicism and enjoy everything, even the cold bowl of porridge, of the Epicureans?
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the Stoic. I'm an Adventist, which is just about as alien for many of my friends, okay? Adventism doesn't go back to the ancient Romans. It actually developed an intersection in the early 1800s between the Restoration movement, which produced the Christian denominations and a couple of other denominations that are common today. Now, the Restoration movement sought to strip away the formalism that had encrusted Protestant Christianity and go back to primitive Christianity. This intersected in the early 1800s with the Millerite movement, the Advent movement, which developed in New England as one of the centers worldwide. It was actually an outgrowth of the Enlightenment and the idea that every man can read the Bible for himself and understand it. And William Miller studied the Bible and came to a conclusion which was radical in his day, that Christ was going to return to this earth soon, because at that point almost every Christian denomination in Protestantism taught that we as Christians were responsible for evangelizing the world and Christianizing the world, and after we had achieved 1,000 years of peace, then God would step in. So the Millerite movement, which said, no, forget about that. Christ is going to come. Are you ready now? Don't worry. Don't put your hope in 1,000 years of peace. Created a sense of urgency. So those are the two traditions that melded to form the Advent movement. Now, our focus is on preparing for the Lord's return. And that preparation takes a very concrete form. We don't think of the body and the spirit as being separate. We think of us being a whole person. And so how we live our lives is our preparation for living with God. So that's kind of the tradition I come from. But today we're talking about health. So in the Stoic tradition, how does caring for the body come into play? How does that fit?
Well, it plays a big role. I mean, at the most basic level, I think in Stoicism we tend to think of what is the purpose behind our actions, right? And there are several different reasons when I've talked with my friends who practice Stoicism that they see themselves as being motivated to pursue an exercise program or a good diet program or so forth. So the most basic, I think, that all of us would probably have in common is well, how does it impact my mental health? And that's kind of what you were talking about, of becoming the monster after being sleep deprived and without food, right? At the basic level, it's a support to your psychological well-being. But also, since we tend to think of things in terms of how we can go through moral self-growth and help others. One thing the Stoics often said was that you need to take care of your body because it's your tool for the world, right? Mm-hmm. This is how you go about helping others in external ways, these things that are not quite within your control but you can do something about, right? Taking care of your body allows you to everything from stand up on a ladder to get something down for somebody, all the way up to more grueling things, staying up with them at the hospital when they're going through a hard time, or going to help somebody with yard work when they can't take care of their yard, like the whole gamut. So self-care is an important step in other care, is one big idea.
Okay. Now, in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition, the Seventh-day Adventist group, they weren't a denomination, the movement was started by a group of teenagers. Okay, the oldest one was 19 when they first started gathering together and studying the Bible, and they had this sense of urgency and passion. We got to get the word out. We've got to tell people that Jesus is coming again, because most Christians weren't aware of that, didn't believe that, which sounds strange today, I know, but that's the way it was 200 years ago. Okay, but they had such a sense of urgency that they were like walking 75 miles in the dead of winter to go study the Bible with somebody. They were living on next to nothing. It was all about the mission. And another 10 years on down the road, by the 1850s, these teenagers were falling apart. Their bodies were falling apart because they hadn't been taken care of them. And going back to the Bible, they discovered the passage that talks about the Bible as the temple of God. And they realized that if we're abusing our bodies, we're abusing a gift that God has given us. And so taking care of the body became part of two thrusts. One, taking care of the body allows us to fulfill our mission, very similar to what you're talking about with Stoicism. And two, caring for the body is an element of worshiping God. So that's where it came in our tradition. Now, the form that it usually takes is what we call the 8 laws, the 8 secrets of health, or the 8 laws of health. And these 8 categories of food, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, fresh air, rest, and spirituality, you look at these and they seem like simple, basic categories. And they are. Because caring for the body is really a simple, basic thing, in my experience. Until we start getting down to the nitty-gritty details and arguing about it. So that's our theoretical background. Okay? In your personal experience, what has caring for the body, what experiences have you had in this element?
I guess at the most basic level, I think of it going back to that famous Stoic principle of what we call the dichotomy of control, things within your power and things you're not. Those are really 2 pieces for me. I don't throw away the things that are outside of my power, but we need personal activity. In each of these categories, eating well, exercising well, drinking enough water, these sort of things are actions we can take to better our own lives. But if you live in a place where you don't have access to fresh vegetables, as many people who live without good transportation in urban areas do, then that's an external thing that inhibits your attempt to live a healthy life, right? And so for me as a Stoic, while I focus on what's in my control, helping others get access to the external preconditions they need to be healthy is part of the puzzle.
But you bring out an important aspect there. We only have control of part of our lives. And it's really easy for us to feel like if we don't get it right, if we don't perfectly take care of our bodies, we're a failure. Mm-hmm. And an important concept in my life has become that health is a journey, not a destination.
That's exactly what my Stoic friends say when I ask them about their workout routines.
You're kidding.
They say they want to value the process, not the end result, and their philosophical view informs that. It's because when we think about valuing ourselves versus I guess the opposite, woe is me, right, or I'm so horrible. The word that we use in Stoic tradition is virtue, which is a little bit crusty of an archaic term for us today, but you can think of it as excellence, right? I want to locate my worth in doing my best to become a more healthy person among many other aspects of life. And so when I'm in the good throw of a good solid workout habit or whatever I need at my level of ability, then that's something to feel good about. Mm-hmm. When I'm not in such good habit, though, the opposite does not apply, or we don't want to let ourselves slip into the opposite of saying, oh, I haven't worked out in 3 years. I'm such a slob. I'm so awful. Why would anybody, respect me when I can't even get off the couch, right?
I don't respect me when I haven't worked out in 3 years.
I'm not saying that you should celebrate your failures, but having a self-forgiving approach is very important.
Here's a parallel story from my life, okay? As a physician, about 2000, I realized the power that lifestyle could have on our health. And I started really promoting it to my patients. I had this grandmother come in her problem was arthritis, and she had chronic pain from her arthritis and had difficulty getting around, and none of the medications that we were trying were helping. And so I pulled out the guidelines for treating arthritis. And do you know what the first step in treating arthritis is? Exercise. Exercise is more powerful at reducing pain in arthritis than any of the drugs that we use. And so I told her this, and she got furious with me, okay? I am in pain and you want me to exercise. If I just walk across the room, it hurts. You want me jogging? And I kind of backpedaled and I said, well, do what you can. And, you know, yeah. Angels fear to tread and doctors don't, okay? She came back 3 months later for a checkup. And, you know, I walk into the room and I say, how are things going? And she said, I've got good news for you, doctor. I walked to the mailbox. And I was like, okay, what is this supposed to mean? And I said, well, that's nice. And I started asking the important questions. And she stopped me cold. She said, no, you don't understand. I walked to the mailbox. I haven't been outside my house in 5 years, but you said I had to start an exercise program. So I walked to the mailbox every day for the last 3 months. And I almost got down on my knees and had a celebration, okay? Because I realized what she was saying. She had taken a step. And to me, that's an important principle. We grow in increments. We don't leap from the couch to the top of Mount Everest. And yet, like what you're talking about, we often judge ourselves. If we can't achieve super excellence, then who could respect us? We certainly can't respect ourselves.
Yeah, I think a universal human battle is how to handle these things that technically are within my control. Technically, every day I can there's nothing stopping me from deciding to get up and exercise or from eating healthier food, but the will often isn't there. And I think often culturally we think the answer is willpower, whatever exactly that is, right? But willpower is a very limited resource. And so thinking of it in Stoic terms, we talk instead in terms of beliefs. That there's this old Socratic idea that everybody tends to do what they believe is good for them. But we tend to have really irrational and conflicting signals in our head telling us what's good for me. What's good for me is relaxing tonight because I'm tired, not exercising, right? Mm-hmm. And that becomes a little way to rationalize what becomes an unhealthy habit in the long term. And building on that is hard. So in Epictetus, one of the most famous Stoic philosophers, he makes a big thing out of shooting for a 30-day habit. If you can do it every day for 30 days, he says that he's talking about moral development or physical development, any of the above. If you can engage in this for 30 days, then he says stop and give a sacrifice to heaven because you've accomplished something great at that point, right?
Interesting. Yeah. Talking about the power of beliefs, though, okay? One thing that I've struggled with is the belief that unless I reach a certain level of exercise or good diet or sleep a certain number of hours at night, there's no benefit. You know, I've got to reach this threshold in order to really benefit. So if I'm not reaching that threshold, then what good is it?
Why bother?
Why bother? Okay? And ultimately, it takes this form, okay? Everybody's going to die of something. So why try? Okay? I mean, the beliefs that we have and that we choose to embrace either empower us in caring for the body, or they disempower us.
One antidote to that idea, everybody's going to die, I think, it makes me think of, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday from my Stoic Fellowship group, and he said one of the reasons that when I think it was when he turned 40, he had kind of an awakening, and he's like, I need to take care of my body because I'm not going to be this glorious my whole life, you know. But he says one of the things that motivates him is, okay, not only do we have this old idea of if I exercise, I'm in a better position to help other people. Though that's true, he has several kids and there's lifting involved and so forth. But also he says, the more I take care of my body over the long term, the less other people have to worry about me, the less my wife has to worry about me, right? So that's one thing. But he said, and this struck me, also the less other people in my support network are going to have to do things for me when I get older. And the less I'll have to rely on them and impose on them. And that was interesting to me as a 31-year-old who has troubles visualizing the distant future.
Yeah, you've got about 6 months before you hit the brick wall.
Yeah.
Okay. Another belief that comes into play, okay, and this is for those of us who have already hit the brick wall. Okay. Once our health has been fractured and we're dealing with chronic illness, there's a sense of, what does it matter if I take care of the body? I'm already broken. All I'm doing is prolonging the inevitable. Because so much of the health messages in our culture are, take care of your body so you can live forever. Or take care of your body so you don't get diabetes. Well, what if you already have diabetes? What if you already have heart disease? Okay. So yeah, beliefs can either get in our way or they can strengthen us.
Yeah.
If we have a belief that's not strengthening us, what do we do with that? I mean, it feels real. I have diabetes. I have arthritis. It feels real that I can't change that. It's out of my control. So why am I beating my head against the brick wall exercising when I can't change it?
A good friend of ours recently opened up to us and told us that she always viewed herself as she just wasn't the type of person that could exercise. She'd tried before. She'd taken classes in college but never been able to sustain a habit. And she had come to view herself just like, I guess in this aspect of my life, I'm a lazy person and that's never going to change. Right? Because it's been that way for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Then at the time she lived in Berrien Springs up in Michigan, and Andrews University built this shiny new fitness center this year with indoor pool, nice equipment and everything.
Now the pressure's on.
So she was like, I guess I'll check it out. But that was an external thing that suddenly made it a lot easier. She said, I enjoy going there, mostly because everything's so shiny, right? But also, it taught me something about myself that really, under the right conditions, when she talked to us, she had been going almost every day for a month or two at that point. And she was excited because it wasn't just that she had developed an exercise habit. It was that she had learned something about herself. Like, she's not immutable. She can change and habits can develop. And for me personally, I feel like, you know, I was terrible at exercise habit for most of my life until a few years ago. And I feel like every little failed attempt made the next one a little bit easier, right? So yeah, super success. I went running 2 weeks in a row. Like that was great, but then I got busy and it fell off of it and it wasn't really part of my life, and so it disappeared. But the next time there's the energy barrier is just a little bit lower to get back on it. Right? So these are the sorts of things that apply when you know what you should be doing.
Right.
It's just a matter of getting yourself with the program.
But when you mention the external effects, I think in my neighborhood there are 3 guys who walk regularly. I don't. I'm not one of them. Okay? I do my own yard work. So I intersect with these 3 guys as they're walking because I'm out in the yard raking or mowing or stuff. Okay? So one of them, his doctor told him, you've got high blood pressure and high cholesterol and you're going to have a heart attack. And so here's $300 worth of drugs I want you to take to prevent the heart attack that you're going to have. And he went home and he said, is there something else I can do besides spending $300 a month? And all he did was start walking. And he walks the 4-mile circuit around our country block every day, rain, shine, freeze, okay? And he's 10 years out now, and his blood pressure's normal, and his cholesterol's normal, and his doctor's not bugging him about, oh, you're going to have a heart attack, okay? So that was his external motivation, okay? I have another one. He walks because he's got a dog.
That'll do it.
So twice a day, he and his dog are out there walking the road. And the dog always stops and talks to me. I always feel like a privileged member of this exercise society because if I'm outside, the dog drags him over so we can talk. You know, okay, I say I'm not part of the exercise group, okay, because I'm not like them. I don't religiously walk. But when I walk, my wife is always with me because my wife walks because it's a relationship, you know. The others either get drug along by a dog or they're out there power walking to improve their health. When Vivian and I go walking, you know, it's arm in arm and, you know, we're having this conversation and it doesn't feel like exercise. Mm-hmm. But I enjoy it so much, you know. So different strokes for different folks, and we often set this threshold for ourselves. You got to do this, or you're not exercising. You got to do this, or you're not benefiting. And the reality is, we have to find what fits in our lives, and what works for us, and what motivates us. And frankly, try to get me out in freezing weather with fear of a heart attack, I'll choose the heart attack, okay? But if my wife were wanting to go out in freezing weather, it would be, yeah, honey, let's go. Because I love my wife. So, anyhow, anything else you want to add?
Well, I was just thinking of your list of 8 secrets of health up here. For me, one thing that I found valuable is to look at health and self-care as a spiritual practice. So I've already alluded to a little bit of that in terms of putting yourself in a better position to, you know, take care of others or something like that. But there's many aspects in which healthcare can be viewed as spiritual. Some of them are more external. Some of them are just, oh, well, it's self-improvement, right? You feel good about yourself when you're done, so this is a way to grow as a person. But on kind of a deeper philosophical level, the body is part of us, right? So, Dad, you and I have talked about how dualism, the idea that the soul is something separate and pure, and the body is kind of this messy, necessary evil we have to tolerate, is an idea that doesn't really exist in either tradition that we come from.
Yeah, when Christianity adopted the Greek dualism of separation of body and spirit, okay, I have a lot of friends who say, well, why should I take care of the body? Because when I shuck off this body, I'm going to be free. And the spirit or the soul will be free.
We're trying to get rid of this thing.
Yeah, we want to get rid of this thing. Okay?
Some
Some
of us more than others.
of us more than others, exactly. Okay, and I understand those emotions. But what Eric and I found this weekend in our dialogue in preparation for this is that we have a common ground in that we have this holistic view of man, that body, spirit, soul, from my perspective as a Christian Adventist, are all one unified thing. You take one part out and it's like taking the batteries out of a cell phone. Cell phone don't work no more. It's not a cell phone. It's just a piece of junk. Okay.
And when we pursue this idea of virtue, this high-minded notion of a moral ideal that we're shooting for, in a Stoic way of thinking, we try and take all of that into account. So, in the same way that I, if I were using Stoic vocabulary from these dusty old Greek books that I like to read, I would say I am a rational and social animal. And that's what it means to be a human being. And the implication is, therefore, I should engage with my community, because being social is part of being human, and I should find ways to benefit people. One really steep ideal that I found in Stoic texts that resonates with me is try to not just be there to help people and be generous when they're in need and they ask for your help, but try to preempt, try to predict what they're going to need, what they're going to need to ask for, so that you can be there to help them before they even ask for your help. Now, that's a really steep bar, and I'm just trying to practice with my wife for now. I think I chose the hardest one, right?
Come back in 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. I'll let you know how I'm doing. So there are these high moral ideals that correspond to this notion of virtue. In Christianity, I think you would call it discipleship, trying to become Christ-like, right? But that applies to every part of what it means for me to be a human. And taking care of myself, even in the absence of people around me, is part of that pursuit of virtue. It's choosing well with regard to my own body, even though I know absolutely that I am going to die someday, even though I know there are limits to how healthy my body can become, especially if I'm suffering from disease. It really fits into this. So health is a spiritual practice, and over here you have temperance on the list. Temperance is a big virtue kind of idea that has a lot of different angles and interpretations. But for me, it becomes, not only do I not want to snack on those chips when we're preparing our haystacks at home, that's one aspect of Adventism that I've still got. Not only do I not want to snack on unhealthy foods willy-nilly, but a little practice that I try and do is just think, okay, I'm in the kitchen, I'm cooking for my wife or for a group of people, and right here is where I have a strong temptation to snack, right? Especially the things I like. I like olives, so I'm always, half the olives are gone before I get them on the haystack bar.
You inherited that.
And so that's a little culturally relative thing in our culture. Eating before you serve the food to other people is viewed as a little bit rude. But it's not necessarily a big deal, right? I'm not saying it's immoral to snack on olives before you. But when I think of it as a spiritual practice, I'm thinking, well, it's not quite as excellent as I would like to be to snack on all these things before I get to the table with my wife. So avoiding not snacking becomes a little exercise in temperance for me that's only loosely related to health. I'm not doing too well. It's when you start identifying small temptations like that as something that you want to work on, you realize just how hard it is to resist temptation.
Yep.
Yep. Simple answer. Yep.
Yeah, and it's very easy to end up a Ben Franklin. You know, Ben Franklin identified several spheres of his life that he wanted to improve, and he had specific goals. And every month, he would check off every day how many times he had fallen short of his goals. And at the end of his life, he said, when he wrote his autobiography, he said, I can't say that I overcame a single challenge, but I did have the satisfaction of lessening my degree of failure. So, okay, so
we say progress, not perfection.
Progress, not perfection. Okay, so there are your thought questions. What's your personal experience been? Okay, health is a journey, not a destination. Growth. You're taking my notes away here, son.
I'm sorry. I thought it was a slide. I was trying to help you.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay, here. Yeah, so I guess I have to freeform this. Okay. Yeah, talk about your experience. And remember that you are not alone. You don't have to be alone. The quest for excellence is a very lonely pathway unless we reach out. And we are social beings. Okay, you talk about your fellowship. I have my church. But in our culture today, so much, we emphasize the power of the individual and we feel like we're somehow lessened if we feel a dependency on a community. But to me, community is where it's at. So find somebody to share with, to talk over yourself, and talk to me. PM me or message on Facebook, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Have a good day.